Give me the thumbs up. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا والحقنا بعبادك الصالحين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. How are you doing? Sorry to keep you guys waiting. Inshallah, I think starting next week, because of where Maghrib is right now, I think we'll start starting at 7:30. So we go to 8:30 and then we'll have time to chit-chat and then pray Maghrib. So last time, we spoke about Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, and we ended with the speech of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu when he accepted the bay'ah from the people, okay? And this is one of maybe the famous speeches in Islamic history that Abu Bakr gave, and he spoke about one of the themes of this speech, I'm not going to repeat the whole speech, was about accountability of the ruler and the contract that is between the ruler and the ruled. What is the bay'ah, right? Anybody who can define a bay'ah here? What is bay'ah? Yeah, Riyadh. Okay, that's like a translation. But what is it that makes a bay'ah a bay'ah? Yeah. Yeah, because what is a contract? A contract is like a mutual promise. You know, I can do a wa'd. I can do a promise. Like in Arabic, a promise is wa'd. Like I promise you, Azan, I'm gonna come to you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Okay. But a bay'ah is a mutual promise. I promise you something and you promise me something back. So what makes the bay'ah a bay'ah isn't that the people come to a ruler and say, oh, we pledge to obey you and that's it. No, there's conditions there. There's a mutual promise there that if I obey you and if you accept this allegiance from me, here's what you have to do to keep that allegiance. And in Islam, that's really one thing. It is quick. Uphold the Sharia. May Allah bless you, okay? And so he spoke about this in his speech, right? Now, Ali as-Salabi, and reminder, that's the author that we're going through. After this speech, he spends maybe like 20, 25 pages really just speaking about what the Khilafah is, what the Islamic system is, and almost basically feels like a YD course. Like, I kept reading it, to try to get to some new content. And I'm like, subhanallah, he just keeps going in and in and in on what does Islam look like? Why is Khilafah a thing? Why is Khilafah important? What are the sources of legislation in the Khilafah of Abu Bakr? He's speaking in terms of the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. But he's speaking also, but the Khilafah of Abu Bakr is not special. It follows the same system that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had already established for the 10 years in Medina, right? So his 10 years in Medina, he had a system going. Now what's different now, there's only one thing that's different, and we might have spoken about this last time, is that now there has to be ijtihad. Before, during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there would be wahi. Whenever a new issue would come down, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send wahi and the Prophet ﷺ would deal with an issue. There is an exception to that. There was ijtihad at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. How did that happen? How does that not contradict what I just said? Where did ijtihad occur before the Prophet ﷺ died? Nobody knows? Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you a hint. It wasn't done by the Prophet ﷺ himself. Well, when the Prophet ﷺ would send Sahaba to different lands, there's famous ahadith that tell us what the sources of legislation are. Okay? So when he would send a Sahabi, he would ask him, when there's an issue with the people, what are you going to judge by? They say, the Quran. So the Prophet ﷺ asks them, well, what if you don't find that judgment in the Quran? So they say the Sunnah. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, what if you don't find it in the Quran and you don't find it in the Sunnah? And that's when they say, we'll do ijtihad. And in some riwayat, they'll say we do qiyas. Qiyas is one of the sources of legislation, right? And Ali as-Salabi talks about this. What are the source of what were the sources of legislation in the Khilaf of Abu Bakr and in Islam? Same thing. There are four main ones: Quran, Sunnah, Qiyas, Ijma' al-Sahaba. So he speaks about the importance of Khilafah, that the Ummah has united upon the Khilafah, and that this is something that, as we spoke about last time, Khilafah was something that was appointed, that was decided on the day of the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. So after all of this, Ali Salabi starts to speak about what was the conditions of the Khilafah at the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and how did he go about, like, what did his first 100 days in office look like? And we're not going to cover all those beginning decisions right now, but we're going to cover almost basically like what was the status quo. Okay? So one of the most important decisions that a Khalifa has to make is the governorship over the state. Some of you might not know that in Islam, like each area of the Khilafah will be divided into a wilaya, into a governorship. And so the wulat, the governors, singular wali, these people would administer, and we're going to go through the list of what their responsibilities were, those regions of the Khilafah, okay? Under the supervision, under the approval of the Khalifa himself. Now there's a very important, before we get to the list of responsibilities of the governors, there's a very, very important thing to understand about the Islamic system. Okay, and this is a way in which the Islamic system differs from both what we see today in, for example, the United States, and what we see, for example, what we saw, for example, in medieval Europe. It's the difference between a unitary system and a federal system. Okay? The difference is that these governors were administrators who were acting on behalf of the Khalifa. And the Khalifa maintains full power over the entire Khilafah. Who knows here how the United States works from a state versus federal perspective? What is the difference between how Khilafah works or let's just tell me basically about state rights versus federal rights? Who knows something about this? I'm not looking for a complicated answer, just a little bit of, yeah, Azan. Yes, correct. So constitutionally speaking in the United States, there are things which the state, and therefore the governor of the state and the government of the state, meaning like the state of Texas, for example, that state has autonomy and authority that the federal government cannot infringe upon. Like the president of the United States cannot come in and say, no, like I disagree with your law and I'm going to overrule it. He does not have the constitutional right. That does not exist in Islam, right? In Islam, the entire Khilafah would be under, like, the rule of the Khalifa is total within the bounds of Islam. Okay? He is the executive. A difference also between the medieval system and between the Khilafah system is that when you saw, like in medieval Europe, you would have a king and you would have many barons. And each baron is responsible for a specific region. Sounds almost like the Khilafah system, right? But the difference is that the people in these administrative regions, these baronies they were called, were loyal to the baron, not to the king. And their loyalty to the king was through the baron. Meaning if the baron switched his allegiance from one king to another, the people would follow the baron, not the king. That makes sense? Basically, loyalty is tied to the person right above you in the barony. In Islam, of course, it's not like that. The bay'ah across the board between everybody is to the Khalifa himself, not to the wali. There's no bay'ah that you take to the wali. The wali will take bay'ah on behalf of the Khalifa. And this was one of the responsibilities of the wulat. Okay? Any questions about this some of the differences in the like high level system. I know this is something like probably you haven't even dipped your foot in before, with regards to the political and ruling system of Islam, how systematically and administratively and legally it differs from some of the systems that we're familiar with. You know, we come from a Western background. Even in Canada, like it's not as states' rightsy as United States, but certain provinces can definitely have jurisdiction and autonomy that the federal government cannot impede upon, right? And definitely, like we're very familiar. If you're familiar with pop culture and stuff, like with kings and barons and knights, and this is not how the Khilafah worked. You know what's interesting? I'll make a point. You guys know Machiavelli? So he mentioned that because the Khilafah system, Machiavelli is speaking about the Khilafah system. He's saying the Khilafah system, because everybody is they have direct allegiance to the Khalifa, it's very hard to invade. Because if you want to invade a medieval kingdom in Europe, what you do, all you have to do is you have to basically get some baron on your side, and that guy gives you a foothold. Because once a baron comes on your side, his people come on your side, his region comes under your side, his armies come under your side. They don't work like that in the Khilafah. So he said that it's easier to invade a medieval European kingdom, but it's also harder to hold. But it's also harder to hold on to once you capture it. But the Khilafah system is very hard to get into because you cannot get a foothold by switching or flipping a wali. Okay? But he does say that once you do capture it, it becomes easier to hold on to due to the direct allegiance to the Khalifa himself. Any other questions? Any questions? Any questions? No one is asking questions. No? Okay, so let's go through some of the responsibilities of the governors that Ali Salabi talks about. Number one, establishing the prayers. Okay? Leading the people in prayer. You might be shocked to hear this as number one, like the first thing that he mentions. Like what? A governor, we usually think about his duties as having nothing to do with deen, nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with prayers. What does governorship have to do with prayers? Right? You would expect, well, like, you know, there would be an imam in the governorship, and then there would be the politician. No, in Islam, these are one person. The governor is the imam, and he leads the people in prayer, particularly the Jum'ah prayer. Okay? So the Jum'ah prayer was more akin to a town hall because it wasn't supposed to be the most knowledgeable scholar who leads the Jum'ah prayer. It was an opportunity for the governor on a weekly basis to address the people. And definitely there's tadhkirah, reminders, Quran, the khutbah as we know. But at the same time, it's an opportunity for even stuff like announcements to happen. And for for kind of a monologue that the administrator can give to his people, right? So prayer, leading people in prayer in Islam has always been entrusted to rulers, either military rulers like the Qa'id al-Jaysh, the leader of the army, would lead the army in prayer, or civilian rulers, as is the case with governors, right? The second thing, jihad, right? The people, the governor often was chosen to not just rule the civil matters of the area, but also he would help with expeditions. Okay, so an example we'll talk about Amr ibn al-As. He was one of the few who were transferred during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Abu Bakr, most of his governors that he inherited, he inherited them from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he kept all the governors. He didn't fire anybody, right? He could have fired them, he could have demoted them, but he didn't demote or fire anybody, but he did transfer some of his better governors to more important administrative and strategic locations. And one of them was Amr ibn al-As, and of course he's the very famous Sahabi radiallahu anh. He was a famous enemy of Islam before his conversion. He went to Habasha to try to get the Muslims deported. But eventually he became one of the most successful statesmen in the Khilafah. Okay? And he was assigned the governorship of Palestine. And you might be like, hold on, wasn't Al-Quds conquered during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anh? And yes, but this is where the strategic thinking comes in. Because oftentimes governors were appointed to regions that had not yet even been conquered, so that they could start to establish a government and policy, and of course the expedition necessary to capture that area. So we would like take a person, Azan, whoever, you're governor of this location now, and it doesn't even exist in our purview. It's not even part of our administration. But now you are responsible for undertaking the expeditions, and when you basically conquer that land, you're going to be the governor of that location. So that's how it worked. Another responsibility that the governors had was appointing judges and officials with the approval of the Khalifa, right? Judges in Islam. Whenever there's any kind of issue between people, sometimes the governor himself would judge, right? Especially if he did not have as much other obligations or responsibilities, he would judge between the people himself. Usually at least in these times, he was a mujtahid. He could make those fatwa himself, or he would appoint judges, and those judges would have to be approved by the Khalifa himself. And something that we're not used to, again, like when we go get married, when we have an issue with another Muslim brother, what do? We go to the imam. But Islamically speaking, this imam has no jurisdiction. Like when you go to your local imam and you get the nikah done or whatever, or you do a contract, for these contracts to be Islamically binding, there has to be a judge who is appointed by the Khalifa. Judgment that occurs by an imam who comes and arbitrates between people. And we know this because unfortunately, even within the Muslim community, sometimes we don't keep our affairs within ourselves. I know many brothers, or I've known some brothers who went through very nasty divorces through the system because their wives just decided to go and take their rights away through the government rather than seek arbitration. But that's not how our deen is supposed to be. This is not how things were ever supposed to be. And this is why Al-Ghazali said that when the Khilafah, without Khilafah, all the judgments of Islam, the ahkam would be nullified. Not because you yourself can't go the speed limit, but because the speed limit's no longer enforced. Giving an example of a law that we're used to in our day-to-day lives. Another responsibility that I mentioned, taking the bay'ah on behalf of the Khalifa, right? So back then, you had to kind of distribute the responsibility here. And, even though Abu Bakr stood up in Medina and took the bay'ah from the people in Medina, you still had to have the bay'ah accepted from the rest of the people across the Khilafah. So they were responsible for seeking that out, okay? And making sure that the people gave that bay'ah. Collection and distribution of zakat and jizya, right? And this is not total because much of this would be decided by the capital, by the Khalifa himself. But there were some aspects of the zakat and the jizya which made sense to keep within the purview of that region itself. Renewing treaties, and this is more specific to when a Khalifa dies. Like when the Prophet ﷺ dies, like we said, lots of these treaties, allegiances were with the Khalifa himself. So, for example, the Christians in Najran, they had a treaty with the Prophet ﷺ. So, the governor of that location had to go and renegotiate that treaty to make sure that these people are still on our side, that we're not going to lose this relationship, even though we have a new Khalifa. And this is going to be super important when we get to Hurub al-Ridda, and I keep saying that every week. I think next week, not this week. We're going to talk about the apostasy wars. Another very important responsibility of a wali is establishing the hudud, crime and punishment, making sure that there's security in their region, and crime does not run amok. And like I mentioned before, they'll often perform ijtihad if needed on situations which there's no sarih hukum from Quran and Sunnah. Okay? Everybody's following so far? I don't want to go over people's heads, Islamic education and culturing. This is also something you might not expect from a governor. You would expect the governor to deal with only the high level. Yeah, but the governor is also responsible for ensuring, especially in this early phase of Islamic history, that the people in their region are Islamically educated, they are connected with their Lord, they understand the Islamic concepts. They're overcoming their jahiliyyah, because overcoming jahiliyyah is a process. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about directly in the Quran when He says, قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا. Right? The A'rab, these Bedouins, these tribes, the people of Arabia, they said, أسلمنا. قل, say, O Prophet, no, they have not believed. لم تؤمنوا. Sorry, they have said آمنا, right? They have said, we believed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, say, no, you have not believed, you have submitted. Say we have submitted, aslamna, until the iman enters into your heart. And that takes work, right? Jahiliyyah is like a very complicated knot that you have to untie bit by bit by bit by bit. And you wanted to make sure that whatever governor you set in the location was not just a gifted statesman, was not just somebody who was adept at administration and politics and delegation. Imagine you put somebody in there who was very professional at statesmanship, but when it came to the Islamic concepts, he was weak. Or he didn't really have an appreciation for the importance of the Islamic ideology and culture. He wouldn't produce a region which was connected with the Islamic concepts. And that would be a disaster. One wali, let me see which, I have a list of the wilat. Ziyad bin Lubayd. From Hadramaut. So Ziyad, radiallahu an, was the wali of Hadramaut in Yemen. And it was said, whenever the morning came, he would go out and teach Quran. And this is the governor. Definitely, especially in more complicated governorships and larger populations, it would be the responsibility of the governor to delegate and to appoint institutions and individuals who would be responsible for the Islamic education and culturing within that region. Okay. Substitution. So when a governor could not do his duties, it was his responsibility to seek a replacement, to seek a substitute. An example here that I have written down is when Al-Muhajir ibn Abi Umayyah was appointed by the Prophet ﷺ over Kinda. Okay, and like I said, Abu Bakr kept around most of the same governors. So Abu Bakr reaffirmed that after the Prophet ﷺ's death. However, Al-Muhajir did not reach Yemen immediately due to illness. Okay, you're sick. You have a Shari'i excuse. But he sent into a request to Ziyad ibn Labid to perform his duties until his recovery and arrival. The same Ziyad we just talked about. A measure that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu approved. Okay? So this was a good list of some of the governors. I'm going to go through some of the list of the governors that existed at the time. And you let's see what you might know some of these names, you might not know some of these names. Okay? So Attab bin Usayd was the governor of Mecca. Uthman bin Abi al-As al-Thaqafi was the governor of Ta'if. Al-Muhajir bin Abi Ubayyah, we just talked about him. He was the governor of Sana'a. Ziyad bin Libad, sorry, Labid. Ziyad bin Labid was the governor of Hadramaut. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, I think that one's maybe somebody that's people might know more, was the governor of Zabid, which is a Yemeni city. Ya'la bin Abi Umayyah was the governor of Khawlan. Mu'adh bin Jabal, the other name that people might know. Al-Jund, he was again, another place in Yemen. Jarir bin Abdullah al-Bajali was the governor of Najran, and so on and so on. I have quite a few more. Hudayfa bin Muhsin, Sulayt bin Qais, Al-Ala bin Al-Hadrami. Now I have a question for you guys. How come we don't see some of the more famous Sahaba on this list of governors? Because after all, isn't like governors like the next most important thing after the Khalifa? Where's Umar? Where's Uthman? Where's Ali? Where are these famous Ansar? Yeah? What does that mean? Yes, that's one very important reason. That's the main reason, right? They were actually in Medina. They were in the capital. They were there to help Abu Bakr himself actually lead the country. And in fact, they were the Shura Council that decided all these names, right? So it's not the case that the governors are the next most important thing. Actually, it's those people in the capital that are more important, right? You can compare like a governor of a United States state, even though the comparison isn't equal. Because like we mentioned, governors in the United States have way more power to, for example, senators in the Senate of the United States, which is, senator is a more prestigious position, especially compared to most governorships in the United States. So one of the wisdoms that Abu Bakr employed when it came to these governors was appointing individuals from their own lands to be governors. Okay, so that's another reason why we don't see many of the famous Sahaba on this list, because it makes more sense to put somebody in there who's from there. This wasn't the case always, but you can imagine that somebody who's from there is going to be able to connect better to the people. He's going to have the trust of the people. And this was the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ before that. As we know, the Prophet ﷺ would send people back when they became Muslim back to their lands. This is before the da'wah became public. And one of the reasons for this is that he would be able to connect with those people and win their trust, and they would know him. And this is a sunnah and a principle for da'wah even today, right? Da'wah today, everybody needs to acknowledge, like, who are you? Where are you from? Who are your people? This could be basically your race, your nationality, could be basically even your life trajectory. Maybe like if you're a math major, you might be able to speak to math majors better. Or if you're a business person and you're kind of a specific type of person, you're going to be able to connect to a specific type of person better. So this is something that you have to kind of look into yourself and acknowledge, think about who you are, and then use that to connect with your people and bring them to Islam and to give them that Islamic ideology. Okay? So this is another wisdom of the selection of these governors. Okay? So this covers the governorships that existed at the time. Next week, what we're going to talk about, inshallah, is the army of Usama and the breakout of Hurub al-Ridda. When the apostasy wars happened, inshallah, next week will be a very eventful week, and one of the most famous instances and the biggest challenge in Abu Bakr's very short khilafah. Abu Bakr was only Khalifa for 2 years and 2 months. So I don't know how long it will take us to get through his entire Khilafah. It might not take us very long. It might take us maybe a few more months max. And Umar might take us like a few years, to be honest. Not only because he ruled for much longer, but because his Khilafah was far more eventful. Okay? So I'll open it for questions now. Sorry? Oh yeah, next week there's no class because of Arafah and Eid. About which what? Machiavelli. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if you're able to invade a Khilafah system, a unitary system, and if you're actually able to perform that difficult task of replacing the leader, then it's easier to keep. Like a specific region of it. No, for that I was talking about because in the medieval systems of Europe, the feudal system, each land, each parcel of land within the state was loyal to the baron who was in charge of that land. And that baron, he had the ability to like choose who he supported. If he supported this king or a pretender king, his people would have to go with him. This was the expectation, and this was how the system was set up. So if you wanted to invade a medieval country, you can't think of a medieval country as just ruled by the king. No, a medieval country is ruled by a bunch of small principalities, each one ruled by a baron. And so if I want to kind of get my foot in, I just need to buy myself into some of these barons. And then I can kind of, yeah. No, I said it's harder to invade a khilafah. Or at least this is his observation. Yeah. Not if you get in, if you're able to fully demolish it, if you're able to fully erase it. Yeah. No, that's not what I meant. But and the reason is, and subhanAllah, I mean, isn't it true? Like, isn't that what happened when the Khilafah was destroyed about 100 years ago, and we were occupied? It's been a long time. Still, we're not much closer from a geopolitical perspective to having it back. It was really a dereliction of duty because it was set up. We had everything going. Everything was going for us. We had the right system. We had the right guidance from the Prophet ﷺ. We had strength in the world. We were a superpower. At one point, we were the most technologically advanced. Everything was going our way. And one of the things that we have to like, and this is maybe a tangent, but many people look at what happened and they don't feel like the Ummah did anything wrong. They said, well, it's not the Ummah's fault. Europe had some conditions which enabled them to succeed in certain areas, and only there's technicalities for why the printing press wasn't adopted in the Ottoman Empire. And when you think like that, this sort of thinking, if you think about a problem in a way that does not admit a solution to that problem, meaning you thought about the problem as something that was inevitable, then you cannot think in a way that can get us out of our situation today. If you can't identify why the Ummah declined and how we failed to keep it from declining, you're not going to identify how we're going to pick the mantle back up and undecline it and revive it. I hope that made sense. It's a very important point. Like, we have to understand. And you people can point specific names in history or specific groups of people in history. That's not the point right now. The point is there is a responsibility that was dropped for the Ummah to have declined. There's no other explanation. But Muslims cannot lose except for any other reason except that. They cannot lose because we tried our best and the help of Allah was on our side and the kuffar won anyway. That doesn't make any sense. This is actually an iman issue. But the reason why I'm spending time on it, I debated some people on this, and it's more of a common opinion than you might think. That no, actually it's colonialist and orientalist to think that the Muslims lost in their technological advancement. And no, actually, we didn't really do anything wrong. It's just the tides of history. What do you mean tides of history? SubhanAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in many ayats, in Tansurullah yansurkum, about the victory that He promised to the believers, and that the only reason that we're not victorious, we didn't do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to do. Period. So let's identify what that is so we can do it now and revive now. Any questions? Any other questions from yeah? Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes, even though he's from a land, a different land, he would be known to the people of Medina. You would not put an unknown person to be responsible for a region, right? These were usually Sahaba that were Sahaba for a long time. Like the example, I'll give you one example which is kind of more recent in the sense that Attab bin Usaid, he was a young Qurashi who converted to Islam during Fatih Mecca. So he's very new actually. But because so he was placed the governorship over Mecca over his qualifications. There would be interview processes. You would ask people who know the person, and it would really be in the at the discretion of the Khalifa. Uthman, he made some controversial decisions over some of the governorships. We'll talk about what those are when we get there. So I don't know if I answered your question, but they wouldn't. That's your intention. Any other question? Yeah. So jizya does not have a fixed percentage in the Sharia. So it was at the discretion of the Khalifa, and it could be changed. It's not like this. Sometimes higher, hasab al-mawdu', sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes they were very big. Like for example, the governorship of Syria, which would evolve and become one of the biggest governorships in the Khilafah, one of the most prestigious during the Umayyad times, for example. It was a pretty big governorship with a large population, and other governorships were way smaller. So it depended, right? Like even in Canada, look, you have Ontario has like 10 million people. None of it has like what 10,000 people. Maybe not that. Maybe a little bit more, but it depended. There wasn't a hard and fast rule on this. Definitely, like let's take the example of Jum'ah prayers. Do you have one Jum'ah prayer for all of Syria, even though there's a governorship of Syria? No, there would be sub-districting in each governorship, so that like people, each what you would call a jami', each area would have a jami' masjid. With everybody in that district would come and they would pray Jum'ah at either the Khalifa himself, like in Medina, in the capital, in the district of the Khalifa, or the governor himself in a governorship in a district where the governor was representing that district or was living in that district, or even a representative of him. So some representative in the chain of obedience, the hierarchy, would lead the prayer. Yeah. 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 Like the Najashi? Well, the Najashi, even though so Najashi accepted Islam and his Islam was kept secret. And he did not. There people differ, by the way, over whether the janazah that the Prophet ﷺ prayed over the Najashi was the same Najashi that accepted the immigrants. So anyway, but without getting into any of these differences, the answer is the same. It's not about an individual converting to Islam. It's about whether or not that region comes under the authority of the Khalifa, right? Because we talked about Am al-Wufud, right? The year of the treaties. When all these tribes came to the Prophet ﷺ, right? And they didn't just accept Islam as an individual. No, they accepted Islam as a nation, as a tribe. We are coming under your authority, O Prophet ﷺ, right? Now, when these people came under the authority, did they remain governors? That's a good question. What was how were the tribes leaders, the chieftains, incorporated into the political structure after they submitted, after they pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ? Were they replaced or were they made governor in certain cases? We'll talk about that next class, inshallah. Any other questions? Yeah, any kind of ruler will do shura. No, it doesn't have to necessarily be because shura is just shura. Shura does not have executive authority in Islam, but the governor should seek shura, so that whether the shura council themselves have to be appointed by the Khalifa, that's not necessary. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay. Barakallah fikum. We'll end here. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير, and we'll see you all not next week but week after.